You know, in the many popular social media services, things like Facebook or Twitter or Vine or Instagram or Snapchat. I know a lot of you older people don't know what any of those things are, but if you're younger, you know, these are social media services, and what users do is they post videos and or snapshots of themselves, and from the material that people choose to post on their social media sites, we can get some sort of sense as to what this person is really like. And so, for instance, I got a couple examples that I just pulled at random off the internet. If we look at Dave Winter's Facebook page, you know, we can see we've got a cute little baby picture of Dave and some graphic up top that says, "Dear our people too." I'm not sure what that even means, but he's a Purdue fan, and his status symbol there, "I'd rather have sushi." I don't know. I know he posted that on Meatloaf Night, so you can figure out. So that's just an example. We can get an idea of something of what Dave's really like from his Facebook page or from his Twitter feed, actually. Next page. "Hey, if it fits in a blender, I'll drink it." And he's more pictures of smoothies. Here in the lower left, he follows the Three Stooges, apparently. And I like these tweets down here in the lower right-hand corner. "I yelp for kelp," #smoothies. You know, "Hail kale" at the bottom, and apparently President of the United States, "Hey, send me that recipe again." They've got some sort of thread going. So, you know. So the point is, you know, we can get an idea of what somebody's like just by looking at the material that they choose to post of themselves on their social media sites. Our social media sites are intended to communicate something of who we are. And, you know, the exact same thing is true, in all seriousness, when we read the Bible, and specifically when we read the Gospels. The Gospels are God's social media site. The Gospels are God's Facebook site or Twitter feed, so to speak. And so when we see Jesus doing in the Gospels what he does, we're getting a sense of what God is really like. He's being intentional about choosing the material that he's posting, so to speak, in the Gospels. When we see Jesus doing what he did in the Gospels, we're seeing God do what God does. When we're seeing Jesus being the way he is in the Gospels, we're seeing God be the way that God is. When we're watching in the Gospels Jesus interact with people, we are seeing the way God interacts with us. And so this morning, what I've decided to do, we began in the Gospel of John just as a Christmas series, and I thought, well, let's just keep going in the Gospel of John. Are y'all okay with that? Yeah, oh, well, good, because we're going to anyway, but I don't know what we would have done if you all would have said, no, let's do something else. So we're going to see, as we continue then in our next segment in John chapter 1, is we're going to see three vignettes or three snapshots or video posts, so to speak, on God's social media site. We're going to see snapshots from the everyday life of Jesus that are intended to give us some sort of sense of what God is really like, and insights as to how he sees us, and insights as to how God actually relates to us. Now, just one quick disclaimer before we jump down into the material. I taught on this passage years and years ago, so some of you may feel like, it sounds a little bit familiar. I think Kent taught on this. And then twice, when I've taken missions teams overseas, I have found out, like at a worship service overseas, like, oh, and Kent's going to preach this morning. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm preaching this morning. So I taught this passage on those team trips. So if you went to Ecuador or Russia with me, which I think is Lydia and Marcia here this morning, Natalie, sorry, that's all I can say. All right, so here's the first vignette of what God is really like. We see this in John chapter 1, verses 35 through 39. And what I want you to do, instead of reading the passage this morning, we've got a video vignette, actually dramatized from the motion picture called The Gospel of John, which actually stays very accurately to the gospel text. So let's take a look at this video segment.
The next day, John was standing there again with two of his disciples when he saw Jesus walking by.
There is the Lamb of God
The 2 disciples heard him say this and went with Jesus. Jesus turned, saw them following him.
What are you looking for?
Where do you live?
Rabbi?
Rabbi.
This word means teacher.
Come and see.
It was then about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so they went with him and saw where he lived and spent the rest of that day with him.
Okay, so there we have it. John the Baptist, the first character we saw, is hanging out with a couple of his disciples, his followers, and Jesus walks by, and Jesus says to his 2 followers, hey, you should go check this guy out. He's really something. And so they start following Jesus around everywhere he goes. It's kind of like, religious paparazzi. They're just following Jesus around, taking notes on everything he does, taking pictures of everything he does, maybe posting it on their Facebook page. And we're told that after a whole day of this, around 4 p.m., so a whole day they're just following Jesus around like paparazzi, Jesus finally turns around and asks them the question, what do you want? In the movie he says the words, what are you looking for? What can I do for you? So here's our first point of application. Let me ask you a question. If you're following Jesus around all the day, like paparazzi, just for hours and hours, just checking him out, and he finally turns around to you after, 8 hours, 6 hours, and he says to you, what do you want? What do you want? How would you hear him ask that question? What tone would you hear in his question if he asked you personally the words, what do you want? So I want you to take a moment, just actually reflect on that right now. Would it be angry? What do you want? Annoyed? What do you want? Maybe it'd be fake. Is there something I can do for you? How do you imagine those words leaving Jesus' lips? There's a blank on your sermon notes. If you even want to jot down your thought, how do you hear Jesus ask you the question, what do you want? Let me just pause now, even in a moment of prayer. Lord, the most important thing that can happen in this moment is that your true voice is heard. And so come, just break through. And give us a sense of what you're really like this morning, Jesus. Amen. Now, if you are among those who imagined hearing some sort of tone in Jesus' voice, some sort of annoyance with asking you, what do you want? Some sort of anger or sarcasm, what you need to recognize is there could not have been any tone in Jesus' question at all. And we know this for a couple reasons. First of all, because we're told in verse 39 of the text that when the disciples said, well, we want to know where you're staying, we want to know where you live, that Jesus responded to this paparazzi question, with the words, hey, come and see. Which those don't sound angry, do they? That wouldn't be the response of an annoyed person or a fake person, but it was a sincere, hey, what do you want? What can I do for you guys? Oh, you want to know where I live? Yeah. Why don't you come find out? Why don't you come check out? Why don't you come hang with me all the rest of the day? So we know that Jesus, there was no tone in his sincere question. What do you want? And secondly, we know that there could not have been any tone, that it was a sincere, what do you want? Because we see similar snapshots of Jesus posted in other places throughout the gospel, scenes of Jesus engaging people time and time again. Hey, what can I do for you? What do you want? What can I do for you? And so this is the very first truth that I want you to take to heart from this first snapshot of what God is really like, of what Jesus is really like. He is a what do you want kind of God. He is a sincerely what do you want? What can I do for you kind of God. He's the kind of God who notices those who are checking him out, those who are taking notes on him, those who are following him around, those who have questions. He's the kind of God who notices those who are in need. And he's the kind of God who, above all, says to that kind of person, what do you want? What do you want? What can I do for you? What can I help you with? You know, he's not the kind of God who says, oh, would you leave me alone already? Quit following me around. Do you have something you need that is like important? Don't you have somewhere else that you need to be? Because you're really starting to bug me. He's not that kind of God, but rather he's the kind of God who asks, what do you want? What can I do for you? What can I help you with? That's point number one. There's a second truth I want you to take to heart about what God is really like, just from this very first snapshot, or this very first vignette we see posted on God's social media site. What I want to do is reset the scene. So the two men, they're following Jesus around, kind of like these religious paparazzi. Jesus turns around and asks them then this question, this sincere, legitimate question, what do you want? What can I do for you guys? Now think about this. You're following God himself around, and he asks you the question, what can I do for you? You know, that's a blank check kind of question, isn't it? I mean, God saying, what can I do for you? Ask me anything you want. What do you want? What would you ask for? You know, Janis Joplin would ask for a Mercedes-Benz, right? Or did. What would you ask for if God asked you a blank check kind of question? Well, what I love about this passage is, what did the two disciples ask for? God himself says, what can I do for you guys? And they're like, where are you staying? That's it. We really want to know where you're staying. Now, I don't know about you, but that strikes me as just a really stupid question, right? I could do better than that. What's the cube root of 43? I mean, there's some sort of important questions we can ask God if he gives us a blank check. You know, why do perforated things never tear at the perforation? That's more important to me than where are you staying? So, you know, but we don't see Jesus respond with this. Seriously, that's your question. That's what you want to know. Where I'm staying. And beam me up, Scotty. No intelligent life down here. We don't see Jesus responding like that. Instead, Jesus says, yeah, cool. Hey, come and see. Come and hang with me. And these persistent paparazzi with their stupid little questions were invited just to come hang with Jesus, God in the flesh. God in the flesh. For the rest of the day, because that's what God is really like. And I love how the actor in the video smiled, you know, the Jesus actor smiled when he said, yeah, hey, what do you guys want? Yeah, come and see. Cool. I love it. I think the actor got Jesus right here, because Jesus is a come and see kind of God, and he extends to you the same smiling invitation to come spend your days hanging with him, you know, stupid little questions and all. Yeah, come on. I love it. That's the kind of God he really is. So, this is what I want to do, just for personal reflection. I want you to take a moment right now just to prayerfully consider, just to even allow the Lord just to kind of show you in your own mind's eye a picture of him inviting you personally, just to come hang with him, to spend your days hanging around with him with a smile on his face. Let's do that. We'll just pause, just between you and Jesus right now. I'm going to pray, Lord, would you show those who don't even believe that you would extend them an invitation to hang with you. You certainly, they don't believe, could see you doing it with a sincere smile on your face. Lord, would you break through that right now and show hearts and spirits and minds what you're really like. Amen. You know, I'm noticing, Emily, you were in Russia? And Nick? Yeah, so sorry, I have more people to apologize to. Yeah. All right, so this second vignette of what Jesus is really like, what God is really like, we see in verses 40 through 42 of John chapter 1. Let's watch the video vignette.
One of them was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. At once he found his brother Simon.
We have found the Messiah.
This word means Christ. Then he took Simon to Jesus. Jesus looked at him.
Your name is Simon, son of John. But you will be called Cephas.
This is the same as Peter and means a rock.
Interesting vignette. So Andrew, the first character in this clip, he was one of the two paparazzis who's following Jesus around all day. And then he later goes and gets, as we saw here, his brother Simon to meet Jesus. And the first thing that Jesus does when he meets Simon is he gives him a nickname. And he calls him Cephas or Cephas, an Aramaic name, which means the rock. Or Peter is the Greek equivalent. It means the rock. And so the first thing Jesus does when he meets this guy is he gives him a nickname. Rocky. Hey, Rocky. Rocky. Now we need to stop and ask ourselves a question. Why did Jesus do this? And of all things, why did he give Simon the nickname the rock? Because frankly, we have the luxury of knowing the rest of the story. We know how the next 3 years of Simon the Rock's life is going to play out. Because, see, we have social media posts of Simon's life. We have snapshots of him proving himself to be anything but a rock. We have Simon proving himself to be a rockhead, maybe, a loudmouth, yes, hot-headed, yes, but the rock? What was Jesus seeing in this loud-mouthed, hot-headed, impetuous goofball named Simon? See, we have snapshots of the rock as actually being the very first follower of Jesus to recognize you are the Son of God. But then moments later, we have a snapshot of Jesus rebuking the rock for speaking for Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Yeah, he's the rock. We have a snapshot of the rock boasting that, we have a snapshot of backing up time order, we have a snapshot of the rock being the first human being, beside Jesus himself, to ever walk on water, right? He's the rock. And then moments later, there's another snapshot of Simon sinking like a rock. He's the rock, go rock, go rock, right? We have a snapshot of the rock boasting that, I will die for you, Jesus. And then a snapshot just a few moments later that when the troops came to arrest Jesus, the soldiers were there to arrest Jesus, Peter pulls his sword and goes after, no, not the troops. Well, there were priests there. He goes after, no, not the priests. There was a little servant boy named Malchus. And so the rock, I'll die for you, Jesus. Where's that servant boy? Whack, I'll cut his ear off. Go, rock, man, defend Jesus against the priest's servant boy. He's the rock. And then with a few hours after this boast, Jesus, I will die for you, we have a snapshot of the rock even just denying that he even knew Jesus with curses and oaths. I don't know him. And he was doing it when he had been confronted by who? A little girl. A little girl. I'll die for you, Jesus. I don't even know the man. You go rock. You're the rock, man. The rock. And right after that, we have a snapshot of the rock bawling like a little baby. Why did Jesus give Simon the nickname the Rock? If we didn't know better, we'd think he was being sarcastic, right? Hey, I'm going to call you the Rock, the Rock. But Jesus was not being sarcastic. He was being very intentional. And the truth that I want you to take home from this second snapshot, this second vignette of what God is really like, is that Jesus is a God who sees us not for what we are, but for what he's making us to be. Jesus is a God who sees us not for what we are, but for who he's making us to be. See, Jesus knew all that was in Simon. Jesus knew Simon for what he really was. There was nothing about Simon's personality. There was nothing about Simon's hot-headedness. There was nothing about Simon's loudmouth braggadocio that was surprising or unknown to Jesus. He knew Simon full well. He knew full well he was this impetuous, fickle, hot-headed person whose mouth could move faster than his brains. Jesus knew all that. But more importantly, Jesus saw Simon for who he would become, for who he was making him to be, not for what he was at that snapshot in time. See, because we also have snapshots of Simon becoming what Jesus was calling him to be. For instance, we have snapshots of the Rock standing in the streets of Jerusalem before the very same crowd's angry mob that just weeks earlier had violently murdered Jesus. And we see the Rock standing before that very same crowd weeks later, declaring, Jesus is alive. That's the Rock. We have snapshots of that very same Rock healing a crippled man in those very same hostile streets of Jerusalem. We have a snapshot of the Rock being arrested for preaching about Jesus. Another just moments later of him being in jail or him being jailed for preaching about Jesus. And then another snapshot of him moments later or shortly thereafter, boldly preaching about Jesus after being released from jail, and he's preaching to the very people who had him arrested for preaching about Jesus. That's the Rock. That's the Rock. And we have one last snapshot, or actually many other snapshots of Peter that we could look at, but church history, not the Bible, but church history provides us with a snapshot, the very final snapshot of the Rock's life. He was being executed, and he was executed on a cross. Upside down. He was executed on a cross upside down because this very same Simon the Rock, who years before that had denied that he even knew Jesus, is this same Rock who was crucified upside down. He insisted to be crucified upside down because he didn't even consider himself worthy to die in the same manner that Jesus died. So when they nailed him to a cross, he said, "Hang me upside down." Simon, you rock. You rock. So what turned this fickle, impetuous, hot-headed Simon into a Peter, into a Rock? It was a God who saw him, not for what he was, but for what he was making him to be. And I just think this is an interesting footnote that the Rock would, late in his life, write these words. If we go to the next slide. Peter wrote, in his kindness, God called you to his eternal glory by means of Jesus Christ. And so after you have suffered a little while, he, this amazing God, the Rock is writing about, that I've encountered, he restores and he will support and he will strengthen you and he will place you on a firm foundation. These are the words written by a Simon who was called into becoming a rock by a God who saw him as a rock in spite of all his failures. These are the words of a man who was transformed not by a short-fused God who quickly loses patience with our fickle failures, but by a God who sees us not for what we are, but for what he's making us to be. A God who, after a little while, in his kindness, restores us and supports us and strengthens us and places us on a firm foundation. A God whose very love for us, his very love for us creates in us the very thing he's calling us to be. Do you hear that? A God whose very love for us creates in us this thing that he sees us to be. That's an amazing God. That's what he's really like. He's a God who sees us not for what we are, but for what he's making us to be. And so I want to pause just a moment for personal reflection right now, and I just want to give you an opportunity to listen to the voice again of this amazing God. And I want us all to pause to ask the question, Jesus, what nickname would you give me? Jesus, what nickname would you give me? Now, some of us might fear or imagine hearing nicknames like, my little mistake, right? My biggest disappointment. Right? If you're, inclined to hearing things like that, you need to remember that Jesus is a God who sees us not for what we think we are, maybe not for what we are, but for who he's making us to be. And so let's just pause in a sacred, holy moment now to listen to the voice of this amazing God. And I've provided a place in your notes to write down a nickname. All right, let's pause. Lord Jesus, speak. Let your tender, restoring, strengthening, supporting voice speak names now. All right, and you can just continue to listen throughout the remainder of this day and this week. I believe the Lord wants to speak nicknames over his beloved followers. And I just want to invite you, if you're having trouble hearing anything, if you're having trouble believing that the Heavenly Father could speak anything of value over you, I just invite you to have the ministry team pray over you. In our ministry time in just a moment following the sermon. Ask them, can you hear the Father's voice for me? Because I'm having trouble hearing anything good from, through my own stuff. So have the ministry team pray over you. All right, let's watch our last vignette here in verses 43 through 51 of John chapter 1. Last snapshot.
The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip. And said to him,
Come with me.
Philip was from Bethsaida, the town where Andrew and Peter lived. Philip found Nathanael.
We have found the one whom Moses wrote about in the book of the law, and whom the prophets also wrote about. He is Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth.
Can anything good come from Nazareth?
Come and see.
When Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him, he said about him, Here is a real Israelite.
There is nothing false in him.
How do you know me?
I saw you when you were under the fig tree before Philip called you.
You are the King of Israel.
Do you believe just because I told you I saw you when you were under the fig tree? You will see much greater things than this. I am telling you the truth. You will see heaven open, and God's angels going up and coming down on the Son of Man.
All right, just a quick biblical comment. The whole thing with the glowing tree, that wasn't actually in the Bible. That was like Hollywood imagination. What in the world happened there? But I just need to clarify. That's not part of the original text. All right, so in this last vignette, what we do is we encounter a man named Nathaniel. When one of the other guys told Nathaniel that they had met the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Joseph, Jesus of Nazareth, Nathaniel objected. Jesus of Nazareth, you heard him say, can anything good come from Nazareth? And so apparently the thought of something good coming out of Nazareth, struck Nathaniel something like it would strike us if somebody said to us, Jesus of Toledo. We'd be like, Toledo? What? Sorry if you're from Toledo. I was just trying to come up with something. Jesus of Toledo, can anything good come out of Toledo, Ohio? And so I just get this picture. Nathaniel strikes me as one of those people who has just a pretty healthy dose of cynicism about him. Just, can anything good come from Nazareth? Jesus the Messiah, right. Nathaniel strikes me as being one of those guys who's pretty skeptical. You know the kind of person I'm talking about? The kind of person who sees the dark cloud on every silver lining. The kind of person who says, well, it is a fact that the glass is half empty. You know that. It's like, okay, yeah, we get it, Nathaniel. Nathaniel is probably the kind of person who's always concerned about what is absolutely right, what was true, what was accurate, the kind of person who, always corrected people. I think Nathaniel was kind of one of those persons who always began sentences with the words, well, actually, an obnoxious person. An irritating person. I bet those who knew Nathaniel got tired of listening to the truths that he passionately defended and would roll their eyes, shake their heads like, oh, please shut Nathaniel up. Somebody shut him up. Anybody know any Nathaniels? My poor wife is married to one. Well, our biblical post here, our biblical snapshot here captures the moment when the skeptical, cynical Nathaniel meets God in the flesh. When cynical Nathaniel meets God in the flesh. And when they meet, before Nathaniel could even begin to pick his fight with Jesus, Jesus says to him these words, now here is an honest man. Here is an honest man, a true son of Israel. And Nathaniel is just completely blown away. How do you know me? And that wasn't like, have we met before? What? It was the reaction of somebody, it was the heart cry of somebody who had been heard and understood, and known and understood. You see me as an honest man? Oh, you really know who I am, don't you? You get me. How is it that you get me? See, that's the kind of response of somebody who's been recognized. That's the kind of response of somebody who's been understood. It's the kind of feeling we have, when somebody important remembers our name. It's like, oh, you know me. See, God made Nathaniel to be an honest man. God himself made him that way. God made him to be a man who had a passion for what is true and for what is right. And those qualities of Nathaniel's character and his personality were actually the fingerprint of God on Nathaniel's life. But as is often the case with all of us, a fingerprint that becomes, somewhat contorted and distorted by life, contorted and distorted by sin, And in Nathaniel's life, this passion, this God-given passion for honesty and truth had become skepticism and cynicism. And then a fingerprint, and the fingerprint of God in our lives can then subsequently, after being distorted by sin and by life, then can come to be unrecognizable and misunderstood by those around us. All right? And I want you to see just two quick truths from this last snapshot of what God is really like. First, we see in this snapshot a God who calls out of us then that which he built into us. He calls out of us that very fingerprint of himself. Not just the good that he's making us to be, as we saw in Peter, but he calls out of us the very good that he built into us all along. His fingerprint all along from the very beginning. Nathaniel, here is a man that I made to be passionately truthful. I myself, Nathaniel, I built that into you. I love that about you. I put that there. And so see, Jesus redeems the fingerprint that God built into us. That's the point that I want you to see. And I want us to read this together. Jesus redeems God's fingerprint on me. Let's read that together. Jesus redeems God's fingerprint on me. So let's pause for personal reflection. What is the fingerprint of God on your life? What are the things that God has built into who you are? The things that God has built into your heart, the kinds of things that God has built into your personality, the kinds of things that you feel passionately about. And maybe even the kinds of things that have become maybe twisted and distorted a little bit by life, by sin, things in your life that's just like, this is who God made me to be, and others don't appreciate it or recognize it or understand it. All right? So how would God fill in, the blank on this sentence stem? I made you to be ... And I love that about you. Understand? So let's pause. I've left those blanks in your notes. What is it that God would say about you? I myself made you to be. And I love that about you. Let's pause. In Jesus, we see a God who recognizes his fingerprint on us. He redeems that. He calls that out of us. He restores the fingerprint of God in our lives. All right, the last truth that I want us to just glean from these snapshots, these posts, these vignettes, so to speak, of what God is really like is from this video vignette that we just saw. So Jesus has just told Nathaniel, man, I love this about you. You're an honest, straight shooter, Nathaniel. You're a straight shooter. I love that about you. And what we saw is Nathaniel is completely blown away. You get me. You really know what I'm like. Nobody else gets me. Nobody else gets me because they can't see past my stuff. But you can. How is it that you know me? And Jesus' response to him was, well, I know you. Well, as a matter of fact, I saw you under the fig tree before Philip found you. And then we go into the Hollywood glowing tree scene. Ah. Nathaniel, though, and when you read the scripture, when you see in the video, if you take out that vignette, when Jesus said, well, before Philip found you, I saw you under the fig tree, Nathaniel's response is, he's just totally blown away. And he says, teacher, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. Right? Now follow that. How do you know me? I saw you under the fig tree. You're the Son of God! Now, I don't know about you, but that strikes me as an overreaction. Right? I mean, if I were to say to one of you, hey, I saw you at McDonald's the other day, and you'd say, you're the Son of God, the King of Israel. I'd be like, no, I was getting a coffee in the drive-thru. You were buying a milkshake for breakfast. Right? That would be, why did Nathaniel respond the way he did? Well, we're not told in the Bible, but this is what makes sense to me. He reacted the way he did because he knew, and I think this is what the little Hollywood-esque, vignette was trying to point out, that I think Nathanael responded the way he did because there is no way that anybody could have seen him sitting beneath that fig tree. There's no way anybody could have recognized Nathanael except God himself in his secret place. Only God himself could have seen Nathanael in his secret place. And so let me ask you a question. How does it feel? How do you feel about a God who knows you in your secret place? Who knows about you what nobody else could possibly know? For some of us, that's a comforting thought. You really know me. You know me in my secret place. You really know me. For some of us, that might be a disturbing thought. Oh, you really know me, right? Well, what does God do with our secret stuff? When we're looking at Jesus, we see God doing what God does. How does God respond to our secret stuff? Well, let's look at what God is really like. In his reply to Nathanael in verse 50, he said, "Do you believe all this just because I told you that I'd seen you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than this." And then he said, "The truth is you will all see heaven open and the angels of God going up and down upon the Son of Man." And this is the point. Don't miss this. Don't miss this. What is God really like? He's the kind of God who sees us in our secret places. He's the kind of God who sees the things about us that nobody else could possibly know. And he's the kind of God who isn't seeking to shame us, to beat us down, to walk away from the stuff he sees in our secret places, but rather he's a God who's looking to call us into greater things than our secret stuff. He's the kind of God who calls us into greater things in our secret stuff, into heavenly-sized things, into God-sized things. He's the kind of God who wants to call us into bigger things than our secrets. He's not a God who's just merely concerned about sin management. He's not a kind of God who's just merely concerned about secret management. He's a God who calls us out of our secrets into bigger things, into God-sized things. He's not a God who wants to rub our faces in our secret stuff. He's a God who wants to lift us up and open up to us the powers of heaven and the glories of the Son of Man. That's what God is really like. He's a God who calls you out of your secret places and into God-sized things. So here's the way I want for us to personally reflect on this truth about what God is really like. I've got a blank in your notes. And what I want you to do is I want you to reflect on your secret place. And then don't write it down. Instead, write down a bigger, God-glorifying, power of heaven unveiling, Jesus glorifying, God-sized thing that God is calling you into. You see what I did there? It's not a God who's worried about rubbing our faces in our secret stuff. He wants to call us into Jesus-sized stuff. So let's pause. God, what is it? Let's have the worship team come forward. Ministry team can, go back into the end zone. Let's stand together.